President Biden will give some new details on the federal response to those wildfires later this afternoon. He's already vowed that the federal government will cover 100% of the disaster response costs for the next 6 months. Also this afternoon, the president will deliver his final foreign policy speech at the State Department. NewsNation will bring that to you live. It is scheduled for 2 o'clock Eastern. All this coming just 1 week before President-elect Trump returns to the White House. So let's bring in NewsNation's Joe Khalil live for us there in Washington. And Joe, this is clearly not how President Biden planned to spend his final days in office.
No, and that's the case with every presidency, right? Is you don't always get to choose the crises, right? That is something that happens and you've got to respond. And oftentimes when you respond to crises, that is in part how your legacy is going to be defined. Certainly legacy, something top of mind on White House officials and President Biden's, given he's got 1 week left in office. That is it. A lot of that attention in those 7 days, these final ones, are going to be spent trying to respond to this fire. So what you've got now, or several fires, we should say, is a briefing that President Biden is going to put together tonight with several officials focused on all of the information they have got as it relates to the wildfire situation in California, what is left for the federal government to do, what they have already done in terms of their response, and then really in these final days, what their role can be to assist with whatever the local and state officials on the ground need. We don't know exactly yet who is going to be a part of this briefing. We've not gotten a detailed list from the White House, but we know that President Biden and Vice President Harris are going to be convening it. The White House press office tells us these are going to be senior administration officials. We assume that that is also going to include FEMA Administrator Deanne Criswell. She did several interviews over the weekend, and at one point she also said she didn't feel as though local and state officials on the ground in California were unprepared. She said rather the conditions on the ground, the conditions from 100-mile-an-hour winds, from the atmosphere that was drought-like, contributed to a situation where it was almost inevitable you were going to see the severe damage that happened there. Those comments got a bit of backlash over the weekend. In terms of the administration response at this point, the Department of Defense, we look to them. They have said that they've already provided some infrared imaging technology to firefighters, to officials on the ground there. That should help. There's also some 1,800 California National Guard that have been prepared and readied to be activated now. The Department of Defense says. State of California actually says that number is somewhere closer to 2,500. And we also know the DOD has now opened up some of their bases on the ground near these fire-stricken areas so that people who have lost their homes have some additional space for shelter should they need it. So a lot of attention being paid to what this administration can and should do in these next 7 days. And we'll get more insight tonight as to how that progress is going. Nichole.
Yeah, hard to believe only 7 days remain. So ahead of his farewell address, which happens Wednesday night from the Oval Office, President Biden, as we mentioned at the top, he's going to be giving a speech at the State Department. That is scheduled for about an hour and a half. What do we expect him to say?
So fitting, this is going to be at the State Department. It's going to focus entirely on President Biden's own foreign policy and the legacy that that leaves for the incoming Trump administration. And you can basically consider this as President Biden's attempt to define for himself what his 4 years have meant in terms of American foreign policy. So expect to hear a lot about how President Biden put forth a big effort to reunite our NATO allies whose relationship with the United States he feels was fraught after the Trump administration. You're going to hear a lot about NATO coming to the defense of Ukraine. You're going to hear a lot about the threat of China and how President Biden feels that his administration did a lot to unite a sort of bulwark in the Indo-Pacific region against Chinese aggression when it comes to South Korea and Japan and uniting some of our allies in that sense. I imagine you're going to hear more about the Middle East as well. So all of those things President Biden hopes to leave as his mark and leave his own positive spin on his foreign policy. That's what we should expect today.
All right, Joe Khalil live for us there in Washington. We just saw Jake Sullivan. He was talking about the upcoming speech. All right, Joe, thank you. Thanks for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find NewsNation on your screen. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.